Welcome to SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. I'm your host, Susie St. Angelo, and thank you for being here. Today's guest is Tammy Smith. She's an RN, BSN, a healthcare professional, wellness expert, and coach with over 24 years of experience helping people improve their health and overall quality of life. With a background in nursing and a whole person well-being, she brings a practical, real-life approach to driving meaningful health outcomes. And today we're going to talk specifically about emotional agility. I think it's a conversation for everyone, and not just if you're in a workplace, but even at home. There's much to learn about our emotional being. So please stay tuned. I'm sure you'll learn something new from this podcast, something small that you can take with you. This podcast is for you if you know you want to change something. Maybe it's your career, your health, or another aspect of your life. And you might wonder if this is the right age or stage to make a change. And you don't know how to start. Or maybe you are caught in analysis paralysis. I see and I understand, and I used to feel the same way. Well, just stay with it. Stay with this podcast, and I know you're going to learn one or two little steps that you can do right now to make a difference in your life. So you can find this podcast on Spotify, YouTube, iHeart, Amazon, and Apple platforms. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get into today's conversation and meet my guest, Tammy Smith. Hi, Tammy.
Hi, Susie. Good to be here.
Nice to have you here. I'm so excited for you to be on SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. I believe we have a lot in common, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation. So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I started my career as a nurse at Riley Hospital and really found that work meaningful. I pivoted into the wellness world, and so I became a certified wellness coach. I'm also a certified executive and leadership coach. And so for 18 years, I was at IU Health in the wellness program. So I helped oversee the wellness program for our employees, as well as it was a product we sold in the marketplace. And currently I'm kind of pivoting into a new chapter, and that is for coaching, speaking, and facilitating. So I really believe that leadership and well-being go hand in hand, and that in order for you to really be the best version of yourself, there needs to be kind of a space for you to pause, reflect. What are your strengths? What are some ways we can help build resilience and prevent burnout? So that's what I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I did experience burnout in my career. In fact, it was all across the board. It was career, health, and marriage. And so I didn't realize it at the time. But as each one was happening, then it uncovered the next one. And so I was around 50 when that happens. I'm 60 now. So, it took a while, and it's a process, certainly, but it's that self-awareness and recognizing something's not quite right, too, and that pause. And I think when we're so busy, it's really hard to take a pause,
Yeah. I meet a lot of really driven, high achieving people who they have a lot on their plate. They have a lot that they're trying to accomplish. And at the same time, you can't pour from an empty cup. And so when you're focused on everyone else, you tend to start neglecting those important things that are going to keep you in a position to do all of those things that you love. So it's really about creating that space and pause, like you mentioned, to focus on some self-care.
Mm-hmm. And so, we were going to talk today about emotional agility. And so tell me about your background and how you got into emotional agility and how you're working with it now.
Yeah. Well, I think as a part of being a health coach, one of the topics that came up all the time was stress management. And I got some really great training in that early on. And it became a topic that I just continued to build learning around, because stress is the thread that goes through all of the things that people are trying to change. So, whenever we were working on some sort of a behavior change around health, invariably stress, emotions, burnout, those all were kind of that thread that wove through that. So most recently, I did some training with Susan David. She's a Harvard psychologist and wrote the book Emotional Agility, and really took a deep dive into that. And I think it just continued to fan the flame for me of passion around this topic, and helping people really build their emotional vocabulary and tap into what makes them tick, and then more, again, greater self-awareness, so that then you can make better choices moving forward.
So can you share with me and our listeners and viewers the definition of emotional agility?
Well, I like to think of it as courage, compassion, and flexible thinking around your emotions, so that you can better name what's going on inside of you and then make a better choice outside of you. And so it's really building that mental flexibility to pay attention to, how do I want to act in alignment with my values when I'm feeling some sort of a trigger or some sort of an uncomfortable emotion. I think a real big piece of this work is understanding that there's no positive or negative emotions. There are comfortable and uncomfortable emotions, and that they're all valid. They're all a part of the human experience. And that's what makes being human a real gift, right? We get to experience all of it.
It does. I would say I did not learn about naming emotions until much later, after I left the corporate world, and I had stuffed so much inside, so many emotions. And so I've gotten so much better at saying, okay, what am I feeling right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's something so small, and yet it's so big, and it's so important to have that awareness.
Well, I think, hopefully we in the workplace are moving toward embracing more emotions. I do think there was some chapters of work, and maybe even in still sectors, that you leave your emotions at home. You leave your whole self at home. You only bring your professional self to work, right? And I think that that's really disconnecting us as humans, because we bring all of ourself to work. And relationships are really an important part of how work gets done. And emotions are a part of the connective tissue of relationship building. So I think you cannot ignore the role of emotions in the workplace, let alone, in our personal interactions.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because times shifted, and for some of us, maybe our mothers stayed at home, and so we didn't have that kind of role model to know, as we navigated the corporate world. We just worked hard, we paid our dues, all those things, and we were also told not to cry at work, that was a sign of weakness. And so I think it depends on who your boss is and who you're working with, if you can show those type of emotions. But I hope you're right about us being in a shift in the working world, where we are sharing more emotions.
Yeah. Well, I do think, part of the byproduct of building emotions is psychological safety. And psychological safety is definitely one of those topics that's really playing a huge role in engagement scores. So workplaces really are focusing a lot more on these concepts of emotional intelligence. We know that if leaders are demonstrating that, there's a direct tie to the bottom line. So productivity, turnover, engagement. So this is not a soft skill. This is really truly tied to the bottom line.
Hmm. And it starts from the top.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. What's
I mean,
modeled?
What's modeled. I had an
Hmm.
introverted president of the organization I worked for. And I'm a little more on the introverted scale too, although I'd say I'm a social introvert. I can be very social, but I do need time to recharge away from people. And I would say, it was so nice to work with someone like that who modeled leadership as an introvert,
Yeah,
and really the quiet times were frankly a little scary. But that you can say that in a personal relationship too.
sure,
It's no
sure.
different.
Right. Well, again, I think it's about the bottom line is, do you care, right? Do you care about the other person, and are you caring about them as a person, not just a product in your company? So part of what is behind this is just humanness. It's hard to human, right? And we are complex. We're made up of heart, mind, and emotions, but also behaviors that are the kind of outpouring of what's going on inside. And so we have a lot of pressure on us. We have a lot of internal demands, that expectations that we place on ourselves. We have a lot of external demands that are coming from either sometimes the person is the caregiver at home. They have a lot of demands outside of their workplace. There might be external demands of, conflicting priorities, and even sometimes values. My values might be bumping up and against someone else's values, or even my own internal values might be bumping against each other. So there's a lot of complexity to our emotions, and on top of that, we have a lot of learned behaviors, a lot of learned protective strategies that perhaps were useful at one point in our life, but are no longer serving us. So we'll only scratch the surface today in this conversation around our emotional health and navigating those emotions. But those are a lot of the things that play a role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was talking to my cousin who lives in California in the HR space and he's been in that space for, 40 years. And he talks about how there's a number of people in his industry, it's the travel industry, and a lot of people are still living at home because they can't afford to live on their own. And so, there's multiple generations living at home. And as you speak of, caregiver roles, there's a lot of sandwiching of people older and younger that are living in the house. And you really don't know what people are going through. And I just had someone on about kindness, and she said, a smile can just change someone's day. They may be having the worst day, or they've just gotten devastating news, but maybe a smile or a small kind gesture can make such a big difference. And we just don't know.
Absolutely. And our brains are wired to recognize that in one another. So what's really cool, we'll talk a little bit about the hardwiring of your brain, but you also have this thing called mirror neurons, where I reflect back what I'm seeing in you. And so if you're smiling at me, there is this mirror response to smile back, and that's just mutually encouraging. And so I like to, always think about, how do I want to show up today? Because what I am reflecting is what someone else is picking up from me. And so it's a great pause question in your day. How do I want to show up?
Yes, 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 yes. I mean, we talked about that. We just had that conversation on Friday that I recorded, and the same that mirroring came back, and it's receiving as well. It's being in a position to receive, and sometimes if you're a type A person, or you're more on the, let's say, there's the feminine side, the masculine side, and if you've been all your life been in a masculine side, sometimes it's really hard to be in that feminine side and receive. And we talked a lot about that too. And so, I mean, it's really interesting that we should have this conversation today. But can you speak a little bit more about the hardwiring part?
Yeah, absolutely. So your brain wants to protect you. Your brain likes predictability, efficiency, And it's constantly scanning for anything that doesn't fall in that predictable category. So change is a great example. When your mind or your brain sees change, it says, wait, I didn't expect this. And so then we have some well-worn pathways that automatically default to help protect you. And that is that fight or flight response or freeze. And so, for example, I love to hike. So if I am hiking in the mountains and I can see this well-worn path ahead of me that many people have traveled, your brain is like that. It has well-worn paths. And I can see right where to go, and it's easy. Now, if a grizzly bear shows up on that path, my brain lights up and says, that's not expected, that's danger, and creates an automatic response. And out of that also comes emotions. So the great thing about your brain, though, is it can be rewired. And so we can learn new pathways. So be easy on yourself when you default to some of those automatic responses, because that is your brain doing its job, and it wants to keep you safe. So again, past experiences might influence that. There might be your brain says, oh, I know this, I recognize this, and sends you on an automatic thought process. So a lot of times we can default to like black and white thinking or overgeneralizing. Those are just a couple examples of those automatic thoughts that your brain is doing to protect you.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was excited because I think sometimes we get used to a certain level of either anxiety or stress because that's all we've known.
Yes.
And whether that's started out in our childhood and adult life, or then it comes through in our work life, we get used to it. But yet, I can relate to that, and I can also relate to the rewiring, because once you realize your body can't handle that anymore, and it starts rejecting,
yes.
then you really can, and you do rewire your thoughts. And you can, I'm speaking from my own personal experience about being with different people who don't make you feel that fight or flight, or situations that you're no longer in. You're in calmer spaces.
Yeah. So it's that rewiring. It's that creating new experiments where you can test a new response and start building that new pathway. So a fun example I like to do is like ask people to cross their arms, and you automatically probably have a way that you do that and that feels comfortable. If I ask you to then consciously cross it the other way and put the other hand on top, it feels a little awkward. It feels a little uncomfortable because it's not the way you're used to doing it. But again, not only do you have hardwiring, you have neuroplasticity, and your brain can learn new pathways and new ways of doing things with practice.
Mm-hmm. So when you work with a client, do you go through these exercises, and is it like peeling back an onion, the layers?
It's absolutely peeling back an onion, and it's understanding what kind of thoughts are they repeating to themselves. So let's get down to the root thought. Understanding what was the trigger situation, what happened, and then what story were you telling yourself about it? Helping them to start recognizing the automatic thought. Okay, so let's talk about that now. Was that true or not true? Or what parts of that were true? What parts could you challenge? Where did you make some assumptions? What else is possible? And so by challenging your thoughts, you can then start to tell another story that results in a different emotion. So that's just one tool. But a lot of times it does start with trying to start to connect the thought with the emotion that's following, and at least build that awareness of that channel or that pathway.
I think we tend to talk to ourselves more harshly than we do our friends, at least from my perspective.
Absolutely. And so that's another experiment I can do with people is what would you say to a friend in this situation? Or how, another way you can do it is I can say, Susie, how would you say that to Susie? So almost getting yourself to say it to yourself. So again, that emotional agility around curiosity. Why am I feeling this way? What's contributing to that? And then that compassion piece of why might I default to this line of thinking? Well, I kind of have this story that has been true from the past, but I want to write a new story and, empowering people to see that they do have that ability.
Or maybe that story is not true, and maybe that story was passed on to us from the generation before us, or maybe that's what we were fed. And, we just, as you said, we need to rewire our brains to tell a different story, a new story.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times that brooding, that rumination, that rehearsing that thought is an example of how you are making that thought have more power than it needs to have, because by rehearsing it, you're building a groove in your brain. And so sometimes it's choosing a new thought and rehearsing the new thought to build a new groove, right? So I often talk about the runaway train. The runaway train. Let's back up the bus and let's go back to that original thought and let's choose a different track.
Yeah. That's a great tip. It's hard in the moment when you're just so overcome by that emotion and that whatever is spiraling or whatever is triggered. And I don't love the word triggered because I feel like that gets overused. I wish I could come up with another word to describe when an emotion hits me. Maybe that's it. It hits me. But no, I really, anyway, I don't know where I was going with that train of thought, but
well, you could call it an activating event. It's an activating event that creates an automatic response. So the idea of emotional agility is to build in a pause. Okay, so I'm noticing what's happening, and now I'm going to name it. So again, we tend to default to some of those umbrella emotions: mad, sad, afraid. And if we can get a layer down, better information. So name it to tame it. Your emotions are data. They're signals that there's something else going on under the hood. And so there's a great tool called the feelings wheel. We can share a link to one that I like, but there's probably many of them out there. But the feelings wheel kind of helps you then dig down a few more layers into what exactly am I feeling? So for example, on the feelings wheel, you might see fearful, but if you dig a little deeper, it might be inadequate, or it might be excluded. So by getting a more specific emotion attached to what's going on, you have better data to then navigate forward and say, what is going to be my next step based on that information? So understanding really the complexity of emotions and giving it better vocabulary, better language to notice. So again, it's that pause. Like you said, I have this automatic response. What do I do? Well, at first it's just take a pause and then notice and name and really identify what is going on there.
What are ways we tend to handle difficult emotions?
Yeah, well, we talked about one of them, which is the ruminate or the brood, the rehearse, replay it over and over. Sometimes we bottle, we suppress. So we talked about that in the workplace, a lot of times people will just push those emotions down. The problem with a bottle or a suppress is one of two things. It can, like a soda can that gets shaken up enough times, it's going to explode. It's going to come out somewhere. And it may come out at home when you get back home and unload on, your family members. Or sometimes suppressed can then show up in your body. And I think you mentioned that had happened to you, where there started to be somatic symptoms, migraines, GI, musculoskeletal. And we know that about 60 to 80% of doctor visits are driven by stress, emotions, and symptoms that people show up. They say, I don't feel good. And it has this, unknown etiology. And a lot of times the root cause goes back to stress. So bottling, brooding, and that ruminating. And then control is trying to control, to me, is another version of stuff. Just really it's a short-term strategy to try to manage emotions. And then ignore, pretend they're not there. But again, that strategy doesn't last very long either.
Can't imagine that works very well. uh, it's interesting because, again, going back to the workplace, some of us who are older have not been taught to really show or share those emotions. So, I think it's really interesting that your background and being in the health and wellness industry, you're really ahead of the curve in talking about this. I mean, I think it's a lot more common to talk about wellness and wellness in the workplace. There's a lot of wellness committees now and companies, and they really do work towards it. But you were like leading the charge long before we were talking about that.
Well, I like to think so. We really did try to create more of a holistic approach to the wellness program. So it wasn't just about weight loss programs or tobacco cessation. It really was about paying attention to what about financial stress? How do we need to equip folks with some tools to build their financial wellness? What about their emotional wellness? What are some tools, apps? We built in some different apps for folks to have a seamless way to get some support and connect, because sometimes it was human support they needed, and sometimes it was, a easier pathway to get through with an app for mindfulness or some stress management techniques. So I think really, to me, well-being is not just that two-dimensional physical, lab work. Those are important signals and those are important data points, but that's not the whole piece of you.
It's not the whole picture. No. I've said that from the very beginning. And that's the impetus of this podcast is we're more than, our health is more than just diet and exercise. It is our finances, it's our career, it's our home life, it's our home cooking, it's our spirituality, our joy. There's so many other aspects of it that contribute. And as long as we can keep them all in balance, or as all the circles or the pie. But it is hard, and sometimes it's hard to identify unless you work with a coach, a health coach, or an executive coach to really dig and find out what areas are not really going so well. And I remember during the pandemic, I was working in a nonprofit, a very large one in Indianapolis, and they had so many donors that I came to work to manage some of those donor relationships and bring more funds in. But I also sat on their wellness committee, and I loved it because they had the distribution side, and then they had the office side, two different people, personalities, but yet we could come together on the wellness committee. And at the time, they wanted to talk. We had lunch and learns on mental health. And at the time, it was really a little more progressive, I thought, because people did want to talk about their emotions. And I was so pleased. We had great turnouts for these lunch and learns from both sides, the corporate and the distribution side. So I think, we're making great strides in that area. But Can we talk a little more about emotions?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you ask it again?
Can we talk a little more about emotions and how we can build more self-awareness around emotions?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, really paying attention to what that notice moment, that notice of what is happening, what am I feeling, and using that feelings wheel to dig in. Then it's understanding what's underneath that. Is there a need that is either being met or unmet? And so there's a great model called nonviolent communication that really, if you wanted to dig in a little bit more into feelings and needs and understanding what is the need that is underneath the emotion is another piece of data to help us then make decisions and move forward with our next steps. Another piece of information is, what do you value? So if I'm feeling this emotion, what is that signaling? Again, it's emotions are signals. So what value is that signaling that is really important to me? Do I really value authenticity? Do I value connection? Do I value fairness? And so paying attention to the value that lays underneath the emotion. So again, when we treat emotions as signals, as data points to help us understand further what's going on, then we can dig in and notice. Another really great thing that I like to do is teach people about grounding. So sometimes when those emotions are very heightened and in the moment are feeling a little overwhelming, it can be helpful to do some deep breathing, to do some grounding techniques, and grounding just means that you are staying here in the present. So there's different activities you could do to work with that, but a real simple one is just your five senses. What do I see? What do I smell? What do I taste? What do I feel? What do I feel in my body? You can ask yourself, where are my feet? Look at your feet. Okay, where am I? And really get centered into the present, because anxiety kind of lives in the future. And if you can stay in the present, then that can help you slow your breathing, slow down a little bit to then pay more attention. And another strategy is just to hold your emotions loosely and to recognize that you are not your emotion. A lot of times we give ourselves labels and we say, I'm frustrated or I'm stressed. And we wear that as a label. We wear that as a naming ourselves as that emotion. Another way to say it is to say, I am feeling the feeling of frustration, or I'm noticing that I'm feeling frustrated. And so that is a way to kind of hold those emotions loosely, separate yourself and your identity from the emotion. And to, again, get that distance, get that pause, and that ability to kind of ask yourself further what's going on.
What I like about that is it goes back to the pause and stopping and noticing. I mean, these are all little things that you can do when I know you're in the moment or a person's in the moment of an emotion. And it's just so simple to ground, to be present, to put your feet on the ground, to witness your breath too. I mean, these are all just really easy things that I think we forget about when we're caught up.
Exactly. So once you can get yourself more grounded, once you can get more in tune with what exactly is going on, what am I feeling, what do I need, what do I value, then you can move more into those cognitive strategies like we've been talking about. So disputing those automatic thoughts. That's when you can start to then get back into that prefrontal cortex and say, okay, is this true? Am I making any assumptions? And that's where you can then decide, okay, what is most important to me in this situation? And what do I want to do next? So hopefully those are some strategies to kind of help one, name, notice, identify the need, and then choose the response that most aligns with what you value and what's most important to you in that situation.
Tammy, what emotions do you think people tend to avoid the most?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, I would say people try to avoid anger because anger is perceived as unkind, or anger is perceived as not professional, or whereas really, if you treat anger as a signal and treat it as a clue as to there's something not right here. Perhaps one of my boundaries has been crossed. Perhaps there's something I really care about, and this is something that is not being taken care of well, and it's important to me. Anger is a great emotion to actually lean into and ask, what is behind this?
Well, I think it's
You
also
seem surprised by that.
I am when you lean into anger, but I also think it's values. Your values are being trampled on sometimes when you're angry. Like people, let's say your value is respect, and you're not being respected either at work or at home. And that's really important to you, then it makes you angry, you know. But to sit in that anger, it's to say, okay, what am I feeling? I'm feeling angry. Now what? Now what do I do? I take some deep breaths. I ground myself. And what am I angry about? Is it the fact that they're not respecting me, or they're not hearing what I'm saying, or, going those next steps?
Yeah, well, let's look at anger on the wheel. So if you look at anger, that is the primary emotion, or that is the umbrella emotion. But again, underneath that are frustrated, critical, skeptical, annoyed, provoked, jealous, violated, indignant. There's a lot of nuanced emotions underneath that. So again, that's why I say lean in and build your vocabulary around what really is the specific emotion, because better data then gives you better strategies to move forward.
Good point. And I do think we should include a link to the wheel. I think that would be very helpful as we're talking about this. But in today's world, we have so much coming at us. We have social media. We have people that constantly are busy because they don't want to deal with their emotions, or they don't want to be alone with themselves. Or there's a lot of uncertainty, and you could say that across the board for a lot of people. How how do you see that? How does that impact our emotional agility and our emotional health?
Well, again, I think it goes back to that brain's hardwiring of we don't like ambiguity. We don't like uncertainty. Our brain wants to know what's going to happen. Our brain wants those predictable paths. And so anything unpredictable, again, is creating that those uncomfortable emotions. So I think just knowing that your brain is there trying to protect you, then it's one of those things of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, leaning into the ambiguity and asking yourself, okay, what do I need in this situation? And if it's more certainty, well, then what pieces, how could I meet the need for certainty? What's in my control? What choices do I have to meet that need for certainty? What do I need to ask of someone else to meet the need for certainty? Are there elements that I could ask for that are within their control to create more predictability? But I think that's the magic question. There is how do we get uncomfortable, or how do we get comfortable with being uncomfortable?
With being uncomfortable. Good point. Are you seeing any new emotional patterns or struggles, since the pandemic and now in today's world?
We definitely saw. We said the cracks were there, but the pandemic really split all of that wide open. And a lot of that stress, burnout, the emotional upheaval started showing up a lot more in the workplace. And if you think about healthcare in particular, which is the space I was in, there was a lot of that. And the impact that we've seen is that there used to be more of a stigma, and perhaps there still is in pockets. But to me, what I observed was we weren't as much fighting the stigma as we were, how do we now get the right tools to the right people at the right time and create pathways for them to access the help. In addition to that, the challenge was now managers, frontline leaders are finding themselves in a position of not only trying to take care of themselves, but they have teams where they are starting to feel like, not only am I managing workforce performance, I'm holding and managing a lot of emotions that are showing up for people. And so I think one of the things we were trying to do was equip leaders and equip managers with how can they, we're not asking you to be the counselor, we're not asking you to take on a role that's not yours, but how can you at least recognize signs and symptoms that this employee might need some further support? And then how do you educate yourself on the tools that are available so that you can provide the support that they need and get them to that support, link them to that support. So I think that there's been, a strong rise in, like I mentioned earlier, some apps, some mindfulness and stress management apps. There's also been a rise in telehealth. And so getting virtual telehealth medicine, telemedicine for mental health has significantly taken off. And again, it's really about building access so that people can get the help that they need.
I read somewhere that those EAP programs, only 2% of the population actually uses them because they're afraid, they don't trust that the information they're saying to the people is confidential, that it gets back to the employer.
Yeah, I think that is part of the battle that we're facing is, again, that psychological safety, that sense of confidentiality is critical to allowing people to feel like they can get the help they need. Again, that's a way where an EAP program could have some sort of an application as an adjunct to their programs that they offer that allows people to have a discrete way to get the help and get that access point.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have a success story, a recent or a past success story that you might want to share with us?
Well, as a coach, most recently, I think what I've been working on with a lady is just digging down a little deeper into the self-limiting beliefs that she has held. So if we go back to that emotion and then digging under that, what do you think is behind that? What are you telling yourself? What are those thoughts that you have on a recording on repeat that just keep looping? And sometimes just having the safe space to say out loud what was in their head and hear themselves say it out loud is so powerful. And then to process together, to come up with, what do you want to say to yourself? And it's very powerful when someone can come up with a statement that they not only believe, but it's relevant to the situation, and it reframes it in a way that so this lady came up with probably 3 different statements that, and then to hear it out loud in her own voice was really transformational. And and it creates upward momentum. So we'll set a goal, and we set the goal small and achievable, and then build momentum on that goal. So the power of your thoughts, I know we're talking about emotions, but those are really the secondary thing that happens. The power of your thoughts, really, it never ceases to amaze me how much power we have in our own minds, and the power in our own minds to start healing patterns that are no longer serving us.
You know what I bet is interesting too from your perspective is to hear someone vocalize something that they've been telling themselves and how they may have not even vocalized it to anyone, yet alone to themselves. And then to hear it and then to reframe it and to put it into a new, more positive light, I would think would be transformational and liberating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another experiment we'll do is, let's talk about the worst case scenario. Tell me what you haven't vocalized to anyone that you believe could be the worst thing that could happen. And then I'll ask, all right, no holds barred. Like, what is the best case scenario? What is the best thing that could possibly happen? And then, all right, now let's talk about the realistic case scenario. And a lot of times what's causing those big emotions is living in that worst case scenario. And so sometimes when they can just say that out loud and then realize for themselves, that's not going to happen, but I'm living as if it will. I'm feeling as if it will. And if I can then get myself more to that realistic case scenario, it's very freeing to then be able to see more clearly and not have their brain so clouded by some of those difficult emotions.
Well, and I think when you mirror back what people are saying, they're like, that sounds pretty ridiculous. That's not going to happen,
Right.
That's not going to happen. But anyway. So Tammy, what is your SOS for someone who is listening or watching today? What are one or two steps that people can take right now besides reaching out to you? What can they do today to move their life forward?
I'm a big believer in the basics. And so eat, move, sleep. And when we are eating the right food to fuel our bodies, when we are moving our bodies, whatever that looks like for you, I'm not saying you have to go do it a certain way, but just move. And then sleep. All of these, there's study after study that each one of these on its own contributes to better health and impacts really most of your body systems. Sleep in particular has been linked to almost every body system. It's your reset. So if you can start focusing on the basics and building in the scaffolding, build in the scaffolding for your life and what it looks like for you to keep it sustainable. You don't have to do it the way someone else is doing it. Now, there are definitely, some recommendations, and you can incrementally work yourself toward those recommendations. But eat, move, sleep. And then the last one is connect. We are wired for connection. We are wired for relationship and community. And that, to me, is the new fourth leg of the stool that, again, you mentioned COVID, like people have become so isolated from one another. And that is contributing to a lot of, mental health issues. So connect, figure out a way to build community. And again, what that looks like for you. So those sound simple, but they are each powerful, done in combination. They're transformational.
I agree. Those are great tips and great advice. Tammy, is there anything else that you would like to share that we didn't talk about?
I really think that just remembering to hold your emotions loosely, that they come and go, and that you can let that intensity pass. It takes about 20 minutes for intense emotions to pass on through. So if you can create a visual for yourself of either watching them like clouds float above you, or picturing them as leaves on a stream, and you are the outside observer. You're standing on the riverbed and riverside, and you are just watching them float by. It's a way to separate your identity from those thoughts and feelings. You are not your thought. You are not your feeling. They come and go, and you get to be the observer, and you get to decide what you want to do with them. So that would be something that remind yourself you can take a time out. You can give yourself a 20-minute timeout to let those move through and give you the space then to choose.
Just like our childhood and timeouts.
Absolutely. It's an effective tool. It's an effective tool for us as adults as well.
That's great. So, Tammy, where can people find you if they want more information on coaching services?
Absolutely. They can email me at info@liveleadwellco.com.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for being on SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. I've enjoyed our conversation, and you've reinforced some things that I believed already, and you've also introduced me, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers, to a number of other habits and tips that they can take with them when the emotions hit.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Susie. It was a joy and a privilege. Thank you so much.
Well, friends, sadly, that's all the time we have today. Thank you for listening or watching SOS for Your Life, Emergency Wisdom for Everyday Life. And thank you, Tammy, for joining the conversation today about the importance of emotional agility. It was a great education in learning to identify our emotions and to pause in our emotional state, and some great tips to get out of our head and out of our body, and to take the next step. So thank you again. This podcast is about all the things that contribute to our health, not just diet and exercise. Hopefully you walk away with more tools in your toolbox and more resources to make those changes. If you're enjoying this podcast and think others will enjoy it, please share it with them. Until next time, take care, and I hope our paths cross again.